folks, this is Rainiac, bringing you another Series 7 Doctor Who review. This week's episode was The Crimson Horror, and as usual, this review will contain spoilers for the episode it pertains to. So if you don't want to have the episode ruined for you, then please watch it in its entirety before watching or listening to this review. Now before I jump into the review itself, I should say that in my review of Cold War, which was also written by Mark Gatiss, who wrote this episode, I stated that Cold War was perhaps the best story for Doctor Who Mark Gatiss had ever written. That was, however, until this one came along. I'm still in two minds whether or not it's better than Cold War, but it's very, very good. There's a lot to talk about, most of it entirely positive. So let's jump to it. First of all, our opening sequence. This established a few parts of the plot very well. It introduced our villain, Mrs. Gillyflower, and really served to show, even in the opening minutes, just how evil she was. That little exchange between the blonde woman and Mr. Gillyflower, she's saying, "So sorry for the loss of your husband, my husband's not dead," then terrifying scream, as I was saying, "So sorry for your loss." That showed just how cold and ruthless she really was. And her entourage of Stepford women, Victorian Stepford women, they were pretty creepy. The fact that they basically looked all the same and didn't move. But they accomplished their purpose in being very creepy background characters. Now, the crimson corpses that were washing up in the river, they were meant to be scary. But honestly, the first time I saw Edmund's corpse, I laughed out loud. It was the big goofy expression on his face, which was explained in the flashback later on. But it was more so the colour of his skin. He honestly looked like he'd just been tangoed. Now, to explain this to non-British people, because I don't know if tango is a product that is sold outside of Great Britain, tango is a soft drink, and it was marketed in the 1990s with the campaign "You Know When You've Been Tango," which was a huge orange guy coming out and slapping people across the face. I swear to God, I'm not making that up. We really did have that as an advertising campaign. The other thing that the opening couple of minutes did very well, I quite like the character of the Yorkshire pathologist. He didn't get much of a name, although in the credits he was named as Silas, which is a typical Yorkshire sort of name. He was pretty sinister for a good guy. He seemed to revel in the horror. He even gave it a name. He called it the Crimson Horror. Any people from Yorkshire that happen to listen to that, I apologise for that terrible, terrible attempt I just made of the accent. I also quite like how later in the episode he didn't faint when he was confronted with what Vastra truly was. He was surprised, but he didn't faint. Unlike Mr. Thursday, who was a recurring joke character who turned up, I quite like the fainting man recurring gag. It's like Only Fools and Horses, which again is a classic British comedy, where they keep fainting in the episode Time on Our Hands. I don't know if it was an homage to that. It possibly was, or I'm possibly just drawing a comparison where there is none. But it happened 3 times throughout the story, and it happened just enough to be funny, and not too many times to be convoluted. Speaking of comedy, Strax was pretty terrific throughout this entire episode. At least he was for me. He has some pretty funny lines of dialogue, and some pretty good character moments as well. And I love the fact that his warlike mentality shone through the whole episode. It's been a running theme with Strax ever since he was introduced, that even though he's a Sontaran nurse and technically a good guy, his Sontaran blood still runs through him. He's still a warrior, a proud warrior at that. I thought Rachel Sterling gave an absolutely terrific performance as Ada Gillyflower, Mrs. Gillyflower's daughter. Now, when she first showed up in the trailers, I wrongly assumed she was the Crimson Horror of the title because of the way her face looked. It was all monstrous and demonic. But it was quickly established that she wasn't the Crimson Horror, she was just Mrs. Gillyflower's daughter. It wasn't until the second time I watched the episode that I spotted the redness around her eyes, because that was a nice subtle hint about how she really got blinded, the experiments that her mother had performed on her to check that the venom could produce a suitable antitoxin. And I also love Vastra and Strax's little business as usual exchange. When Strax said to Vastra, "How will she find the doctor?" He said, "For that, she just needs to ignore every keep out sign, every keep out sign, and run towards danger whenever it presents itself." And then Strax just looks at him and goes, "Business as usual then?" Business as usual, Strax. I love that. That summed up the character of the Paternoster gang and the Doctor perfectly in that one little exchange. Now, when Ada first referred to her monster, I assumed it was going to be either Mr. Sweet or a previously unseen monster of the episode, maybe the Crimson Horror of the title. So when it turned out to actually be the Doctor himself, I thought that was quite a nice twist. The first time I watched the episode, I couldn't work out for the life of me what the purpose of the room with all those gramophones set up was. But on the second watch I realised they were there to keep the facade that this was an ordinary factory in place. They were giving off the sounds that a factory would make, the sounds of industry. So they were there to give the impression of a busy environment and keep the real purpose of the factory hidden. And before I go any further, I have to give huge props to Dame Diana Rigg, who played the villain of this episode, Mrs. Gillyflower. Mrs. Gillyflower was a really twisted villainess, perhaps one of the most wicked characters we've ever seen in Doctor Who since the series returned in 2005. She came across as completely irredeemable, and yet she seemed to revel in the evil that she was doing, which was ironic that she's irredeemable because she's the one preaching salvation to the people of Bradford. The scene where it's the Doctor that's revealed to be Ada's monster, that was pretty unsettling to see the Doctor frozen, almost in shock. He looked so helpless. His mouth was twisted and he couldn't move it, and also his skin was orange, but I won't hold that against him. It was just very unsettling to see this great hero brought low to the point where he needed the help of Jenny to save him, and also Ada to sustain him, as it were. Although how he actually ate the food when he was stuck in that position, I think that's another plot hole we can chalk up. But again, it's not a particularly offensive plot hole. I don't mind plot holes when they're minor like that, and they don't really affect the episode's story too much. When they're whacking great plot holes, that's when I have an issue with them. And the first watch, I thought it was the sonic screwdriver that healed the Doctor, and I was all prepared to start ranting about how it would become a magic wand again, but it was actually the machine he was in, as I saw the second time around. I even referred to it as the revivification chamber, I think, because it's later used to heal Clara, and presumably its purpose was to bring the chosen ones, Mrs. Gillyflower's chosen ones, back to the land of the living after her apocalypse had struck and wiped out everybody else. And another thing this episode really did right was how it neutralised Jenny. Prior to this episode, Jenny has been seen by many as the weakest of the three of the Paternoster trio. But here, she got the starring role. In fact, in many ways, she was the Doctor's companion for at least the first half of the episode. From when she found him and rescued him and put him in the revivification chamber, I still don't know if I'm saying that right or not, till the point where Clara came back, at which point she resumed her role as companion and Jenny took more of a background role. But I like the fact that she got her moment in the sun, and she got a couple of really good scenes. The way she reacted to the Doctor's kiss by slapping him in the face was hilarious, but it makes sense because she is Vestra's lover, after all, as you find out in The Snowmen. And it was hinted that Good Man Goes to War, but it was really rammed home in The Snowmen. And also the bit where she got to kick some serious ass against Mrs. Gillyflower's assistants, disciples, whoever they were. It was great to see Jenny absolutely flatten them with some fighting moves. The scene was a little too short in my opinion, but for what she got to do, it was pretty good. And I like how Vestra actually had the smallest role to play. Madame Vestra is a great character, but the last time the Paternoster Gang were featured, she got the most screen time by far. And I think Strax was second and Jenny a distant third. This time, she gets the smallest role to play, and she's mainly there to explain things to the audience, although she does have a couple of nice exchanges with Strax. Now, the whole flashback sequence, the way it was handled, was pretty inventive. And it finally explained why the Doctor was the last thing that poor Edmund saw before he died, although I did notice that the image burned into his retina, which was developed by Vestra and Jenny, was very different to the image that he saw before he died in the flashback. We also got a reference to the fifth Doctor in Braveheart Clara, because he used to say it to Tegan, who was the gobby Australian that the Doctor was referring to, by the way. Matt and Jenna's Yorkshire accents, the jury's out on that. I thought Clara, for all that she talked about in her Yorkshire accent, Jenna, Louise Coleman, whatever, I thought she did a pretty good job, because she didn't have much to say in the Yorkshire accent. Matt Smith, I think it might have been hit and miss. Some people may disagree, they may think he nailed it, others may disagree and think he didn't nail it at all, but that's entirely for you to decide. Another thing the flashback did very well was to prove that Ada wasn't actually a villain, she was just a misguided puppet in her mother's grand scheme. She was going along with it because she wanted salvation because of her blindness, her being a social outcast. Her saving of the Doctor, yes, it was done for selfish reasons, but she still saved him. Without Ada, the Doctor would have been, quote-unquote, doomed. And the scene where Mrs. Gillyflower pretty much abandoned her daughter to die was cold as goddamn ice. It turned Ada into a very sympathetic character who was being manipulated by her beast of a mother, and proved just how far gone Mrs. Gillyflower was. From that moment on, I think Mrs. Gillyflower was pretty much doomed. If you think about it, she was pretty much doomed from the off, because there was no way the show was going to allow a character as evil as that to survive. Not only is she evil, she is willingly evil. She's not been manipulated to being evil by Mr. Sweet. She is willingly doing all this. She is willingly being cruel and vindictive and evil. Strax got 3 great scenes pretty much in a row. Firstly, Strax versus Horse scene was absolute comedy gold. When Strax said, "Horse, you have failed in your mission," I was just nearly rolling on the floor laughing. And then we got Thomas Thomas. Now, I didn't get the Thomas Thomas gag until about 45 minutes after I'd finished watching the episode. And then I got it, and when I finally did get it, I found it absolutely hilarious. For those that don't get it, mostly, again, non-British people, TomTom is a British satellite navigation system that a lot of people use on phones and iPhones and cars and the like. So that was the meaning behind that gag. If you were not British, maybe you didn't get it, but I am British. I thought that was hilarious. Some people disagreed and said it was completely cringeworthy and shameless and not needed, but I don't mind comedy. Even though the episode was quite dark, I don't mind comedy in it to lighten the tone a bit. And the other scene he got that was great was when he went gun crazy, chasing after Mrs. Gillyflower's disciples, and then Vestra has to send him back to the outside. It's almost like he's a child that has to be told off and told what to do. It's great. It really captured the individual characters of Vestra and Strax very well indeed. Clara once again shows herself to be very intelligent, because it's she who's the first one to spot the chimney that doesn't blow smoke and is in fact a launching pad for the rocket, or a disguise for the place where the rocket gets launched. I would have preferred Jenny to get that distinction, because once Clara was on the screen, Jenny was kind of relegated to the background again, kind of undermining all the hard work that Mark Gatiss had done to make her relevant to the story. But Clara is the main companion, whereas Jenny is a guest companion, so I can kind of understand why he did that. Now, I loved the entire scene where the Doctor confronts Mrs. Gillyflower in her organ room. And by the way, I like the fact that the whole church and organ theme that went on throughout the episode. It's a religious cult because she's offering salvation from Armageddon. The organ, which turns out to be the controls for the rocket, and she's quoting things like scripture and hymns and the salt over her shoulder, keep the devil at bay. It made her a much more rounded villainess rather than just a typical cheesy pantomime villain who wanted to take over the world. I'm not going to do that joke, I swear to you. Yes, I'm the Doctor, you're nuts, and I'm going to stop you. That was a great line. That's probably a contender for one of the best lines of the episode. There are quite a few contenders for the best line of the episode, and a lot of them were in this little scene where the Doctor and Clara confronted Mrs. Gillyflower. Now, when Mr. Sweet was revealed, I hardly expected him to be revealed to be the Great Intelligence, because it would have kind of fit in with the whole storyline that she had a silent partner, and also she kept referring to her work as the Great Work. But I suppose that was a red herring. Maybe it was intended to be, maybe it wasn't, but it certainly worked as a red herring, intentional or not. So when he was revealed to be a parasite, it was both surprising and pretty cool. Although, the scene where she opens her dress and it's there, basically clutched to her bosom, very kind of creepy and unsettling. I know several friends who literally recoiled upon seeing that for the first time. Now, some of my friends, some of the same friends in fact, have said that Mr. Sweet looked pretty cute, but I personally thought he was kind of disgusting. He looked like a tiny alien lobster. Indeed, Mark Gatiss said when he was designing him, he was going for a sort of lobster/leech design. And, of course, Vesta refers to him as the repulsive red leech, although I, like the Doctor, prefer the term, the Crimson Horror, much better. Mrs. Gillyflower then got a fantastic villainous line in, "Do you know what these are? The wrong hands," and then she went for the button for the rocket. That was a great line for a villain. And when Ada came in and started beating her mother with her stick, her cane, I was cheering. It was a great moment of redemption. And then, seconds later, when her mother pulls a gun on her and uses her basically as a hostage to ensure her safety, shows just how evil her mother is. And for once, redemption does not equal death. At all. In fact, the opposite. She redeems herself and gets to live. Mrs. Gillyflower can't redeem herself at all, and she dies horribly. Speaking of great lines, I've got a sonic screwdriver. Yeah? Well, I've got a chair, and she lobs it at the organ. That might be the best line of the entire episode. As I said, there's quite a few viable candidates, but that was a pretty damn funny line. And it was certainly good that Clara got to deliver that, because at that point, she had taken over the role from of the companion from Jenny. And as Clara took the role over from Clara, that wouldn't have worked. Even with the wobbly time and why thing, that wouldn't have worked. No, Clara took over the companion role from Jenny, who took it over from Clara. And oh no, I've gone cross-eyed. And just one little thing before we get into the whole final scene with Mr. Gillyflower shooting at the Doctor and his companions. Her entire plot is a little off. First of all, there's a rocket in 1893 Victorian Yorkshire. How did that rocket get there? Did Mr. Sweet tell Mrs. Gillyflower how to make a rocket? Because he's just a parasitic little leech that lived for 65 million years to survive growing off the fat of the land. I don't think he knew how to make a rocket, although maybe one of his old hosts knew how to make a rocket. Don't forget the Silurians were the initial victims of these parasites, so maybe he got it off one of the Silurians, which then died and he maintained the knowledge. I suppose that could sort of work. Also, it was never really explained what her motive was for setting off this apocalypse with all the red leech poison. I think the best thing to compare it to is a Victorian version of Moonraker. In fact, her plot had great connotations of, not great connotations, had very large connotations of Nazism. The whole perfect race, living when everyone else is dead in the dust, that's a very Nazi-like sort of mantra. And that's basically what she was trying to do, trying to preserve the perfect people with the goop, throwing the rejects out into the canal where they died. Well, they were already dead before they went in the canal, but you see what I mean? Kind of uncomfortable connotations of Nazism. Despite that, she's still a great villain, by the way. And despite the fact that the plot is kind of thin with her motivation, doesn't really explain her motivation, I can let it slide. Let's put it that way. I can let it slide. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. I kind of guessed that it was Mrs. Gillyflower and not this non-existent husband of hers, who, well, he did exist, but now he's clearly dead. Maybe he was one of the first victims of the horror. Who knows? That it was Mrs. Gillyflower that blinded her daughter, not Mr. Gillyflower. But I thought that it was either an accident and she blamed the husband, or she had been the one to beat Ada and she again blamed the husband. Not that she'd experimented on her to get an antitoxin. Again, that was very, very, very cold. But then again, Mrs. Gillyflower is a very, very, very cold character. And that was the reason for the particularly brutal manner of her death. Strax gives her a warning, she fires, he shoots, he misses, but the shot caused her to drop her gun and tumble off the staircase to her death. It could have done without the Doctor's whole ouch, which kind of undermined the whole scene. But I loved the final exchange with her daughter where she says, "Forgive me, Ada, never, that's my girl," and then she dies. It was just a great way to finally show, just even in death, even while dying, she still was a complete monster, completely irredeemable. And although Mr. Sweet was responsible for a lot of the episode's deaths, she was truly the monster as opposed to the little parasite. Now, some people have thought that Ada's brutal beating of Mr. Sweet was totally uncalled for, but for me, it was called for. Alright, he was trying to survive, he was trying to live, but it was him who, intentionally or otherwise, caused Ada to be blinded, which is why she beat him, by the way, and also killed a lot of people in the process, and he did it willingly. Again, his motives were much purer than Mrs. Gillyflower's. He was doing it to survive, she was doing it because she was off a rocker, I think. I thought Ada was going to step on him accidentally, and that way she was going to kill him. You know, they were going to take advantage of her blindness. But then her face turned again, she started thrashing him with a cane, and blood and guts went flying everywhere. Seriously, watch it again, it's a pretty gory scene. And although this probably was not the reaction that Mark Gatiss was going for, I started laughing out loud again. I couldn't help myself. That final ending scene with Ada outside Sweetville, that sets it up perfectly for her to join the Paternoster gang. She would certainly fit the whole outcast theme of the group going on, although I'm not sure of Rachel Sterling being a big-time actress, and this is no offence to any of the other regular actors in Doctor Who, because they in their own right are big-time actors and actresses, but she's worked on stage, in films, TV. She's quite a busy actress. She's in high demand. Of course, she's Diana's daughter, and she plays a lot of difficult roles, so that's understandable. Once again, the Doctor refuses to tell the whole story, this time about Clara and the other Clara, because they saw Clara die, remember, in Snowmen, to his friends. This again fits the fact that he's very secretive, and goes back to what he said in Journey. Secrets are what protects us, secrets are what keeps us safe. And just one little theory on the subject of the Doctor's name, which may or may not be brought up in the finale. I don't know if anyone's picked this up, but there seems to be a lot of reference to monsters and to the Doctor being compared to, or actually being a monster himself. So if his name is revealed, and again the jury's out of whether it is going to be revealed or not in the finale, is it possible that monsters are going to play a part in it? Maybe his name is that of a legendary monster, who knows? I'm just wildly speculating here, but we had the line from Hyde where every lonely monster needs a companion, and then he had a sort of a strange look at Clara, indicating that he meant himself as much as the crooked man character from Hyde. And then, of course, we have Ada referring to him as my monster, my special monster. Now, the final minute of this episode I have a real problem with. It was pretty damn cringeworthy, and it threatened to undermine all the good, and there was a lot of good, as you can tell from my gushing tone, that had come before it. These photographs that are on the internet, they in themselves are completely implausible. Who in the hell took the one that was set in Hyde? Because the four of them, the Dr. Clara, the Professor, and Emma, are all in the photograph, and at that point of the story, Hyla had not even been discovered yet from looking at the background, let alone be rescued. So who the hell took the photograph? Unless it's going to play into the finale that somebody actually put these photographs on the net deliberately and were there, kind of like the silence being there but not being there because you can't perceive them, as a means to draw out Clara being the woman twice dead. It's a wild theory. I'm pretty good at wild theories, but not all of them are accurate. Even worse about this little ending bit, the kids, the two Maitland kids, came across as manipulative little shits. Apologies for the foul language, but I do not like these characters at all. They can't seem to act, judging from this little scene they had, very well, and I am not looking forward to having to endure them being in next week's episode, Nightmare in Silver, which I was otherwise really looking forward to. They pretty much just blackmailed Clara into letting them come aboard the TARDIS. There are so many things wrong with this ending, it's not even true. And the fact that it plays into Nightmare in Silver, I'm going to suggest boldly that Mark Gatiss didn't originally write it, or was told to write it by either Neil Gaiman, who's writing the next episode. Oh, I've just given the game away, whoops. Except not really, because it's kind of well known by now. Or the showrunner himself, Stephen Moffat. I don't think it was needed. Okay, it's nice that it actually links on to the next episode, which is something we haven't had in this series yet. But, in my opinion, unnecessary, and it paints the children in a very, very bad light. Despite that little problem at the end, however, this was still a very enjoyable episode. It was somewhat of a Doctor Light, which doesn't always work, such as in Love and Monsters, where it really, really didn't work. But it did here. Jenny finally got to show us what she can actually do, and I like that it was the Paternoster Gang and Ada, and not the Doctor, who really got to save the day. In previous episodes, Clara has saved the day, the Doctor finally got to save the day in Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS, and here we get the Paternoster Gang and Ada. And for an episode that was mostly centred around the Paternoster Gang and Ada, it was only fitting that they got to be the saviours for this episode. If you wonder what I mean by that, it's Vestra and Jenny who remove the goo from the rocket so it can't kill anybody. Strax, of course, kills Mrs. Gilliflower accidentally, because I don't think he was aiming for her. I think he was aiming for either her gun, and he didn't actually hit her, but the shot did cause her to stumble backwards, because she's an old woman, don't forget, and die. And of course, Ada finishes off Mr. Sweet. There was a lot of humour in this episode, and yet a pretty dark tone was maintained throughout, so that was quite a nice balancing act, and the plot was balanced too, as a result. I've raved about Mrs. Gilliflower and Ada, but Mrs. Gilliflower was a fantastically twisted villainess, and Rachel Sterling put in another amazing performance as Ada. She plays very difficult roles in her career. She has played, in one of her TV roles in the Inspector Morse spin-off Lewis, she played a woman who was actually a man, so she is no stranger to difficult roles, but I feel she nailed this one absolutely. And I can safely say this, Mark Gatiss, you've done it again. Is this better than the Cold War? I still can't decide. I've watched them both a couple of times now, And I've got to say that they're probably equally good. They are certainly up there with the best episodes of this short run, and possibly the best episodes of Series 7 in general. People may find that highly contentious and disagree with me, in which case, comments are below, people. Let me know what you thought about it. And one slight note before we go to next week's trailer for next week's episode. If this story wasn't what we call a backdoor pilot for a spin-off featuring the Paternoster Gang, I'll be absolutely astonished. And if that spin-off ever does come to light, I'd be fully on board for that, especially if Ada Gilliflower was in it from time to time. As I say, given her status as a big-time actress, she may not be available for it, which would be a shame, but maybe she could make 1 or 2 appearances. I'm not asking for her to be a 4th member of the gang full-time. I mean, obviously, that would be Strax, Jenny, and Vastra. But you could have her as a guest slot, I suppose, if it wouldn't take too much out of her schedule. Just something I'm throwing out there. Next week's episode, I've already kind of revealed this, but Nightmare in Silver. I am very excited for this, despite the presence of the goddamn Maitland brats. I have personally always liked the Cybermen as villains, and judging from this trailer and the pre-episode material, they have been given a drastic overhaul, while still at the same time the old Cybermen appear as well, because they are shown briefly in the trailer, as well as the stomping noise, which is divided opinion. Personally, I like the stomping noise, but maybe if the Cybermen were more silent, they'd be more deadly and therefore more frightening as a concept. Neil Gaiman has said in an interview that he's trying to make the Cybermen scary again, or Cybermen scary again, so we'll see if he succeeds. But judging off the trailer, there's a pretty good supporting guest cast. We have the guy who played Herrick in Being Human, about the vampires. Being Human UK, not Being Human USA. I forget the name of the actor, but I'll put it on the screen for you now in the annotations or something. We have Warwick Davis, who is better known for being Wicket the Ewok in Star Wars. And we have Tamsin Outhwaite, who has been in quite a few roles in her career as well. So as I say, pretty good cast. And to cap things off, Neil Gaiman is the writer, and his last effort, The Doctor's Wife, was terrific and very well received by most of the Doctor Who community. So I can only hope that he does the same, or much the same, with this. So join me next time when I review Nightmare in Silver. Until then, this is Rainiac saying bye for now.